Good evening. Welcome to the Church of the Redeemer and to this installment of the Voices Speaker Series. For those of you who haven't been to a Voices evening before, its intent is to serve the broad community of Baltimore by inviting contemporary voices to challenge and inform us. Artists and authors, visionaries and thought leaders, advocates of change, courageous enough to hold the loveliness and sorrow of the world at once and to find the wonder in both. I think that Dean Richard Sewell of St. George's College in Jerusalem may be perhaps one of the most able to hold the loveliness and the sorrow of the world in this moment at once. So wonderful to welcome the very Reverend Canon Richard Sewell, Dean of St. George's College in Jerusalem. Dean Sewell will update us on the important witness of St. George's College, Jerusalem, and also brief us on the current situations in the West Bank and Gaza, with particular concerns for Palestinian Christians. Thank you for being with us tonight. He'll speak for 25-30 minutes, and then I strongly encourage you to then engage him in a dialogue. I've got a microphone there, and I'll come to you to if it's easier. So we'll have at least half an hour or so to be in dialogue together. So again, welcome.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for being here. I'm always so impressed by people who come out in the evening to hear a speaker, because midweek, there are so many other things to do, and it's the very committed and really serious Christians who are the ones who come out. So well done, all of you. You get extra points. And it's a great pleasure to be with you. It's my first ever time in your beautiful state of Maryland, and therefore, of course, in Baltimore. And it's a pleasure to be with you here in this beautiful church. I mean, would somebody please take a photograph of me, because I think I am made to look magnificent by what's behind me, or at least in my imagination I am. But no, it's a real delight, and thank you, David, for inviting me. My talk is simply entitled Being Church During Wartime. October the 7th, 2023 did not come out of nowhere. War had been brewing for 75 years. In fact, you could say that Israel and Palestine have been in a constant state of war, interspersed by ceasefires. 1948, when the State of Israel was created. 1967, 73, 86 to 89, 2000 to 2003, 2014, 2021, and finally 2023 are all periods of warfare or intifada. So, Christians and everyone else didn't suddenly have to learn about living through war 2 years ago. They had been picking up tips all along, generation to generation. But 23 to 25 has been on another level entirely. Israel literally got the shock of its life when Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad broke out of the jail of Gaza and ran amok. Israel was hardly unfamiliar with terrorist attacks and multiple deaths, but previously these had been one-off events. A bus bomb here, a suicide bomb in a cafe there. Awful events that created fear and devastation. But October the 7th was something new, something different. It was a coordinated mass attack on an event, the Nova Music Festival, performed right on the edge of Gaza's southern border. There were simultaneous attacks on kibbutzim and a military base. The Israeli Defense Force, the IDF, shouldn't have been taken by surprise in the way they were, but apparently they were taken by surprise. Palestinian fighters caused fear, panic, and devastation. They won the day by a country mile, and the spoils were 250 hostages taken back into Gaza and held for bargaining. They shouldn't have been surprised, but they were. They shouldn't have been surprised because in 1948, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were bombed, shot, or terrified out of their homes and had to flee for safety. One of those designated safe zones was the Gaza Strip. No one was happy to be forcibly relocated into a strip of land which over decades became more and more like an open prison. You cannot keep 2 million people in those conditions, regularly subjecting armed forces and civilians alike to such treatment, building up, without building up a stockpile of resentment, rage, and a desire for revenge. Into that fertile ground was planted a militant form of Islam, which gave religious rocket fuel to the instinct for retaliation. Hamas formed out of other forms of anti-colonial, anti-Western Islamic ideologies, which had been formulating a religious justification for a violent response to oppression. But in all honesty, you would not have to be Muslim to be furious enough about the loss of land, home, culture, and a sense of future, which occurred first in 1948, to want to participate in a fight back. Christians too, right from those early days, had been active in anti-colonial, anti-Israeli response in the Levant from the very beginning. Such was the shock, outrage, and triggered trauma for Israeli Jews when all of this occurred, that they quickly began to formulate a massive shock and awe military campaign, the like of which Palestinians had never seen before. This too was fueled by militant religion, drawing on the tales in the Hebrew Bible of land clearance and ethnic cleansing, which the authors of the book of Joshua understood as their divinely sanctioned right and duty. Invoking the deep intergenerational trauma of the Nazi Holocaust, they set about the total destruction of Gaza, its people, its infrastructure, its culture, and its economy. Nothing and no one would be spared, because everything, everyone, and everything they believed was Hamas, and Hamas must be destroyed once and for all. The world saw this, and the world declared that this was good. Or at the very least, the world said it was okay. But for many people around the world, rather than shock and awe, it was deeply shocking and truly awful. Western governments nodded their approval, but the peoples of many of these countries objected, and objected strongly, loudly, and relentlessly. Eventually, this, along with other factors, shamed those governments to change their tune to some degree, even when Israel declared a total siege of Gaza. No food, no medicine, no water, till Hamas was brought to its knees. And the Western powers could barely bring themselves to object. Without giving full support, they certainly did nothing to prevent it. The shock and awe also provoked a reaction which sent shudders through Israel. First it was Hezbollah in Lebanon, then the Houthis in Yemen, and finally Iran. For the first time, Israel took a pounding. Whole towns in northern Israel had to be evacuated, and when Iran's ballistic missiles started to be sent in waves, Tel Aviv took significant hits. This was all of Israel's greatest fears coming to fruition all at once. But despite all of that, a comparison between the damage to life and infrastructure in Israel and in Gaza is no comparison at all. Israel's total deaths in all of this are counted in their hundreds. Buildings destroyed, dozens. But in Gaza, the deaths that we know about, the names we have recorded, are 70,000, and by many estimations, potentially double that or more. And 90% of all buildings in Gaza are either destroyed or significantly damaged. 2 million people and their homes, their hospitals, their schools, their libraries, their religious buildings, 90% finished. In Israel, there was significant opposition to Netanyahu and his government's policy of the forever war. Voices were raised with vehement passion for the hostages. They called for an end to the war, to bring the hostages home, but with far less vehemence and barely any passion. The call for an end to the war for the sake of Gazan children, women, and dying in their droves was relatively little. In the context of all of this, how do Christians live out their faith? What does it mean to be the church when a genocide is being enacted on your people? Palestinian Christians don't only care about Christians. There is a deep affinity between Palestinian Christians and Palestinian Muslims. And no one need point out that sometimes there are differences, disagreements, and great tensions. That goes without saying. But the idea that they are in a state of constant animosity is completely untrue. We took an early devastating hit when our Al-Afni hospital in Gaza was hit, most likely by an Israeli missile, although we'll probably never be able to prove it. At the time, there were howls of outrage that Israel would never do such a thing as deliberately bombing a hospital. A year later, when 90% of all medical facilities in the Gaza Strip had been leveled, that outrage was put into perspective. Yes, Israel would bomb hospitals. They just had to find justifiable reason. We were devastated at the multiple deaths at our hospital when a ball of fire consumed countless lives. Archbishop Hassan, our Anglican Archbishop in Jerusalem, called a press conference and drew attention to the inhumanity of it all. He couldn't name Israel as the culprit because we couldn't prove it, but he railed against the idea and the practice of bombing civilian areas, where sooner or later one side or the other would hit hospitals and other places where innocents were sheltering. It wasn't long before any pretense at avoiding civilian risk was openly abandoned. The heads of churches in Jerusalem called for a ceasefire and condemned war as an unholy act. They called attention to the devastating cost of war in which there are no winners. The vast majority of church leaders and institutional bodies around the world couldn't even bring themselves to say that much. Hamas was condemned, and Israel was advised caution. In my view, the global Christian community as a whole failed to make the right calls at the right times, failed to see what was happening and the genocide that was unfolding, failed to stand alongside Palestinians in general and Christians in particular in their greatest hour of need. At some point, with the benefit of hindsight and better perspective, I suspect that the long book title of Omar el-Akkad's brilliant book will turn out to be true. This is the long title. One day, when it's safe, when there's no personal downside to calling a thing what it is, when it's too late to be accountable, everyone will always have been against this. It's a book well worth reading. Perhaps the most distressing issue in everything that has occurred since October 2023 is not the Israelis that Israelis should attempt to erase the threat of Gaza and also the Palestinian essence, but that it should go on for so long. And for the most part, the most powerful nations of the world looked on, fully aware of everything that was going on, and said that it was okay. Not only that, but they enabled and armed that erasure. I do believe that all of this will haunt the world for a very long time, and so it should. And if it is possible to think of the world as a whole having a soul, I feel that our world's soul is sick. It's a sad and tragic reality that when the global Christian community was truly required to speak and to be prophetic, it lost its voice. Unprecedented numbers of people of all faiths and none took to the streets for an impressively sustained period of time, but our religious leaders and most politicians failed to heed the cry. Perhaps local Christians in Palestine also did not always speak out as clearly and strongly as they should have done. And if they had, it could be that those church leaders around the world would have found more courage. But part of the reality that has been created by Israel's most extreme regime in its history is that any Israeli Palestinian who dared to question the means and ends of Israel's genocidal war was likely to pay a very high price indeed. And if that person was a religious leader, their church, their denomination, would likely pay a heavy toll too. Unable to see that reality, Western Christian leaders, those in the countries which were excusing and enabling Israel's fearful vengeance, found adequate cover for their silence. Religious and political leaders were also cowed into silence and collusion by Israel's practice of responding to harsh criticism with automatic cries of anti-Semitism, blood libel, and terrorism justification. Having said all of that, I'm pleased that after the first 6 months of abject failure, the Church of England began to find a voice via the channel of those bishops who made solidarity visits and saw far more clearly what was going on when they spent time with us, breathing in our reality. It's also true that Pope Francis made some strong and clear statements, mostly along the lines that all war is futile, and that to target or to fail to protect innocents in war is a crime against humanity, and those statements were heard. The Pope's much publicised daily phone call to the Roman Catholic priest, Father Romanelli, in the community of the Church of the Holy Family in Gaza, was an act of radical solidarity, which actually only served to heighten the failure of so many other church leaders to do very much at all. I'm sorry this sounds like something of a litany of complaints and grievances. But in a sense, I cannot apologize for that. It is the truth as I see it and feel it and have lived it. But it is not the whole picture. Where the church, both locally and internationally, has succeeded is in the generous support for the practical and pastoral needs of the people, both Christian and Muslim Palestinians. The extraordinary generosity through the great work of the North American Friends of the Episcopal Diocese of Jerusalem has been nothing short of heroic. This has enabled us to maintain the ministry of Al-Athmi Hospital, which has been nothing less than a miracle. Our hospital has been hit by missiles and drones 10 times, causing severe damage and death. Despite that, the ministry of the hospital and hence of the diocese has been the very work of Christ, binding wounds, healing the sick, and offering a dignified death to those who cannot be saved. Also, the Jerusalem Princess Basma Center has also had a remarkable ministry in this time, continuing their care for children with disabilities from the West Bank and East Jerusalem, but incredibly also initiating new work in Gaza in the last 2 years through our hospital, setting up a small team of workers to do rehabilitation work with children with disabilities, some of whom have had those disabilities through the injuries that they've incurred during the war. Gaza now has more amputated children per capita than any other country in the world. And the recovery of that alone is going to be a mountain to climb. Since then, the work has grown, and hopefully in time, when Israel finally allows aid and sufficient aid workers, as well as sufficient food to get into Gaza, which we hope might be any day now, long promised and never delivered because of Israel's deliberate ploys to prevent aid and food going in. We hope that we will be able to begin to rebuild our hospital, which despite its hits is far less damaged than every other hospital in Gaza, and has had only a few weeks in the entire 2 years when its work has had to be paused. But there is so much to do, and our staff are utterly exhausted. They are still malnourished. They need relief. They need their own healing, recovery and recuperation. We need to send a mass of medical staff in there to relieve them, to assist them, and to continue the vital work of healing and treating children. One of the most distressing things, I mean, so many stories of distress that have been known, but one of the, in a way, the simple worst was the account I recently heard of one of the hospitals where there were a number of dialysis machines, and each one of them had bullet holes right through them, deliberately ensuring that the elderly and infirm who needed kidney dialysis would not be able to get their necessary life-saving treatment. Imagine the mindset of what is going on that makes a soldier do such a thing inside a hospital. So many other stories, so much more to say. I've not even touched on what's going on in the West Bank, and everything that's going on in the West Bank, and and that gets much less coverage, is all part of the same operation of what Israel has been doing in Gaza, which is to make life for Palestinians utterly intolerable, to force them into a position of wanting to leave. They say voluntarily, but how can that be voluntary when you are making life so dangerous and intolerable that you cannot imagine remaining there living? To flee at that point is a life-saving decision, not a voluntary decision. But the life and the conditions for Palestinians in the West Bank is becoming increasingly difficult, if not impossible. The incidents of armed settlers attacking unarmed Palestinians in their villages, burning down their olive groves, burning their houses, attacking people with no weapons, is being multiplied over and over again. In October alone, 250 incidents which have been recorded, aside from all the ones that Palestinians have not recorded because they know it will only bring them more trouble. And Israel's army, not preventing those attacks, all too often supporting them, providing extra armed cover while the settlers do their disgusting work of terrorism. Palestinians in those conditions are utterly defenseless. They have nowhere to go because when they are attacked, they cannot contact the Palestinian police because the Palestinian police are not permitted to intervene when there are Israelis involved. So the only thing they can do is to call the Israeli police, who literally do not care. So they are at the mercy of ideologically motivated, religiously fanatic, armed and dangerous young men who know they can attack Palestinians with impunity. And all of this is widely recorded on films. Anybody who thinks I'm exaggerating, you only need to Google this type of thing, and a screed of reports, even in the Israeli press, Haaretz, the Times of Israel, the Jerusalem Post, they're all recording these incidents. There's no dispute about it. And we, the Christians in the midst of it, me as a foreigner living close amongst the people, have seen the inaction of the world and been in a state of despair. And wonder, what do we need to do, to say or to show, to bring the world to action, not just to have words of condemnation, which increasingly did come, but to back up words with actions that actually have an impact. And finally, we might be in a phase of time that has shifted and constrained Israel and begun to give Palestinians in Gaza, at least, an option for something better that might, if we're really fortunate, begin to take us to somewhere slightly better. You can see I'm being very cautious in my optimism because we've been devastated by dashed optimism so many times that we dare not put out too much of that. And in the midst of all of this is St. George's College, which should be vibrant, busy, centre for pilgrimage. In my early times when I first arrived in 2018, the college was more often than not full with pilgrims from all over the world. Then 2 years of absolute silence in COVID, and then a slow period of building up again through 2022, 23, just about to go into a really positive period, and the war began, and and effectively closed us down again. We are hoping we might be able to run pilgrimages again very soon. And that is what my staff are desperate for and what they want me to be doing here. And perhaps we might talk a bit more about that in the Q&A. I'll finish with 2 requests. One is, when it comes to the question time, please don't ask me, where is the hope? I've lost patience with that question. I recently saw the film of an account by an American Muslim who had done 2 periods of service as a doctor in Gaza. And for a period of 45 minutes, he gave an account simply of what he had seen, what he tried to do, and what he felt he'd failed to do. He apologized for it, but he said, I want you to be sure about the reality, so I'm going to tell you a few stories. And some of them were really harrowing. I've heard all of these things before, and it still brought me to tears. And then in the question time, in a church like this, with a few more people, got to the question time. One question, just asking for some clarification. Second question, standing up, saying to this doctor, and where do you see hope? It made me absolutely furious. How dare you ask somebody who's given you that account to give an account of hope? It's like walking through Gaza knowing that there's a family under the rubble in Gaza City, finding some of them dead and one of them still alive, and peering into the hole and saying, are you feeling optimistic? It's so wrong. And it's rushing to try to make us feel better, when what we really need to do is just to stay with the pain and the difficulty and try to work out what we do with all of that. And also, I've had to completely rethink what I mean by hope. We far too readily use it as a synonym for optimism. And that's not Christian hope. Christian hope is founded in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. It's a backward-looking idea on those realities, and it's a forward-looking idea for the final consummation of all things, where love is victorious and all things are reconciled with a new heaven and a new earth, and the sure and certain hope of resurrection to eternal life. How do you preach hope to a people being genocided? You say, God is with you. God will hold you. And your final destiny is with the loving and merciful God. You do not say, oh, don't worry, tomorrow's going to be a better day. This is a travesty of Christian hope. And I really encourage you to separate optimism and hope. When you mean, are you feeling optimistic? Are there grounds for optimism? Say that. When you want to talk about the ground of Christian hope, think of it as a theological reality. Sam Wells, a British priest and vicar of St. Martin's in the Field Church in Trafalgar Square, wrote about this one time, and I heard him say it recently for the first time. He said, hope cannot be distinguished from faith and love. They belong together. And when we understand that, we see that hope is a dynamic. It's a thing that we do. And it's a thing that we can bring and enact by our own faith in action. And it's the ways in which we demonstrate the love of God in all places, at all times, and especially for the weak and the vulnerable. We bring the hope. It's not just imagining seeing the cavalry on the horizon who are going to defeat the forces of darkness. We have a hope, and a hope that will not disappoint. And that is rooted in the love and action of God in Jesus Christ. It is on this that my faith depends. And it is this that has helped to sustain me through these darkest of days of our suffering. And the ways in which the friends of the Diocese of Jerusalem and the friends of St. George's College have stood by, because personally we have been upheld extraordinarily with love, care and prayers. So the criticisms that I've made are not to everybody, of course, because there have been many exceptions. That has helped to sustain us. The prayers of those who have loved us have sustained us, and the messages of kindness and solidarity have sustained us. And in the end, that's what gets us all through, within the context of our faith and knowing that Jesus promises to be with us to the end of time. So the first request was, please don't ask me about hope, and I've told you, I've given the answer that I would have given, but I don't have to be annoyed by the question. Secondly, please ask me, what can we do now? And that will be the answer that I give at one point in our Q&A. Thank you.
Can I bring the microphone to you?
Let me just say, I don't know what I expected, but I didn't expect the truth. And it's so refreshing to hear it from clergy. And it's hard to deal with all that pain. And I don't know if people here understand little things they can do. Our government has supplied the bomb money for the bombs that have killed these women and children. You can write your congressperson, you can send emails, you can write letters to the editor. Watch The Only Truth I've seen about the situation, a program called Democracy Now, which is on YouTube and the internet, where you can actually see every day how many Palestinians have been killed, what the brutality is. You know, the whitewashing, the international criminal court, many areas of the world. And I get so upset when someone says, how could we have let the Holocaust happen in Germany while the world watches the Holocaust? But I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Can you hold the microphone close to your mouth?
Thanks. Thank you for coming, for starters. And I know there are a number of people in this room who have been to St. George's. I'm one of the lucky ones. I was there quite a while ago. And one frustration that I have, and I'm sure most of us have, is how to really do something to make a difference. Yes, I get the St. George's and the Diocese of Jerusalem emails. Every once in a while can send a contribution. I don't know how many people know that those exist even, but it is one way to keep up. But I don't see many churches paying much attention to that. It's sort of a political issue on the other side of the world, and it's not an issue for our churches. There's an interesting American organization, and again, I know other people who know about this. It's called J Street. It's a Jewish organization of Americans who do oppose much of what is going on in Israel. And not only do they have a good communication system, and you can join if you are sympathetic to what their goals are. You don't have to be Jewish. And one of the things that they do is they really speak out and participate politically. They know all the different candidates for Congress and whatever, and they endorse people based on their position on what's going on in the Middle East. And I wish it were possible. I wish that the Christian churches would do more of that, because, you know, I'm sure everybody here feels, what can I do? Okay, I can put a check in the mail every once in a while. Many of us, of course, are not able to, none of us really, to go over there and volunteer in a hospital, but contribute a little bit. But it seems that there should be more that we could do to make our concerns heard and to explain to more people what the needs are. And I'd love some suggestions from you.
I think I hear you asking the question, what can we do? Thank you so much for asking that question. I'm so relieved to hear you ask that question. So there are many things that you can do, but the one I particularly want to commend tonight is to come to Israel, Palestine on pilgrimage. Now, well, book now. It may be 6 months' time, or it may be 9 months' time, and please come to St. George's. There are lots of different ways of coming on pilgrimage, but I'd like to commend especially St. George's College. So you can go to our website, and I'm hoping that David might begin to think about running a pilgrimage from here. And you know, maybe 2027 or whatever, but if you book in 6 months' time, you will be paying a deposit for your place, and that means that money comes into St. George's College. And it begins to get us afloat again, because we have had no income for 2 years, because nobody's coming. And when the war started and clearly was not going to be all over in 6 weeks like we all thought and hoped back in October 2023, I said to our international board, my first commitment is to not make redundant any one of our staff. We have a very small staff, but they're very dedicated. Some have worked for the college for over 30 years. Some of those, their father worked for us before that, and their father worked for us before that. And we talk about the staff being a family. And some of you know what our staff are like, and they're wonderful, dedicated, they love pilgrims, they will give their time to talk about their lives, their ordinary lives. They're so open-hearted, and they literally love the college and their part in it. And we talk about them as family, and I can't do that and then say, but we don't need you. We'll let you know if we can have you back. So I said, let's keep them employed. But in order to do that, we had to raise a lot of money. And that was incredibly successful. And some of you have helped with that and have given, and we've raised nearly $1.3 million, which has meant that I've been able to keep my staff on, some of them with nothing to do. Because with no emails coming in, no requests, nobody coming, I can't generate new work for them every day to do something. You know, they've tidied the office over and over and over again, they've done all the housekeeping, those things are done, and there's still nothing to do. But to cast them off would have been to throw them on the scrap heap. And at the moment, with the economy like it is, particularly for Christians and people working in the pilgrim and tourist business, they had no alternatives. So we're desperate for the time when we can receive pilgrims again. We're desperate for those bookings. to make us feel like we're entering into better days. And when people come, we will give them a very different experience of pilgrimage to what we did before, because there will be more encounters with the local church, more encounters with other local people, and you will hear their stories, and you will see the suffering that will continue, no doubt, because it's not going to all change. It's going to take a lot to derail Israel's policy of crushing the life out of Palestinians everywhere. But we hope that might begin to change. But you will have your own stories to come back to write to your senators and write to your other representatives and write to your local press. Say, I have been, and I saw, and I heard, and I understood. And those things count for an awful lot. This is what we've done with Church of England bishops. And I know Bishop, you came and you saw, and that changes so that when critical Jewish people try and close down and say, you don't know what you're talking about, you go, well, I don't know everything, but I do know what I saw, and I do know what I heard, and that has a power. And we did that with Church of England bishops, all of whom sit, the ones that I invited, sit in the House of Lords. So they can raise questions in the Houses of Parliament and ask ministers. I have just seen a young woman. So I'm going to tell you, how are we doing for time? We've got a bit. I'm going to tell you about Leanne Westall, Anglican young woman, 25 years old. She was at Berzate University, doing pastoral care work through a student organisation, ensuring that new students had enough money to be able to do the necessary and organising walks out in the countryside, the sort of things that we do for freshers, you don't call them freshers, do they? First years, to make students feel welcome. For some reason, the Israeli security forces decided she was a danger to society, and they arrested her. They put her in jail for 8 months. They released her on bail. And then 6 months later, they arrested her, and they kept her in administrative detention, which means no charge, no trial, indeterminate sentence. She stayed inside for 9 months. She was released, but told that she would go back into prison at some point. She would have to turn up in court once a month to report to the court, and back in, what are we now? November. Back in September, they took her back in jail for another 8 months. And I take all of our bishops to go and meet her mother and father, Lulu and Sammy, who have been subjected to the most awful treatment, once by 15 heavily armed soldiers coming in the middle of the night, breaking down the door and holding the two parents at gunpoint, gun in their face. You move, I shoot. These are members of our church. Lulu is like, your favourite vestry member, who's always there to open up the church and do all the necessary, will clean up after everybody else. That's them. She's the most gentle person imaginable. And she is utterly heartbroken, because Israel believes that this young woman, who I know personally, is a danger to the state, and is treated as if she were a terrorist, held in a prison outside her own country. That's a war crime. Unable to be visited by any of her family, unable to be visited, request to be visited by her priest, refused, request to have a Bible, not met. In fact, the last time she was in jail, they did give her a Bible, 3 days before she was released. These are attacks upon fundamental human rights. And when you meet those parents, and you meet other people like this, and you come back and you can talk with the same passion that I do, that's what changes minds. You won't change everything. We know that people are stuck, but people who don't know enough can be changed. And so this is what I ask you. Please come. Solidarity means being with. And actually being with in person is the best type of solidarity. So I know it may not feel right now that it's safe. Actually it is. Our children are coming out for Christmas. They came out for Christmas last year. They came out for Christmas before. This year their partners are coming as well, and their partners' parents are this year feeling it's okay. But certainly, if nothing changes for the worst, I fully expect there to be large numbers of pilgrims coming into the land by Easter. It may take 6 months, 9 months, or a year before people are ready to come by the time they've saved up and made the plans. That's what I'd like you to do. So that's one of my answers to your lovely, helpful question. Well, you know, I think you already know what you can do from here because you're already doing those things. And it is about petitioning and advocacy. But in the end, the power is with the leaders, and they have to be petitioned by enough people so that they know it matters. And that's what changes their policies, is when they think it matters enough to people who vote for them. But I know you've got a world of other troubles, and it's easy to be so focused on that, it's not surprising. But the global Christian community, the Christian Palestinians, need their brothers and sisters before it's too late. I know I talk a lot, and I want to give
No,
you time.
I just wonder, if we came, we've been many times actually to St. George's, but not for a while. If we came, would we be able to get out of Jerusalem?
Yes, of course. Yeah, I go into the West Bank all the time. There is trouble, but we've always done that, where we will look, and if there's stirrings over there, we'll go, oh, we're going to change today's plan, we won't go there, we'll go there. We have all the knowledge on the ground, because we're not a commercial tour company coming from America. I've got a priest in Nablus, and I can pick up the phone to Father Jamil and go, we were coming to Nablus today, do you think it's okay? And he'll go, oh, Father, I don't think so today. Let's leave it and see what it's like next week. Fine. So I'll phone somebody else and see what it's like. We have all the local knowledge, and I'm never, ever going to send a group into somewhere that I don't feel it's safe. So that's what we're about. That's our business. We know what's happening on the ground, and we'll make sure everybody's safe.
Dean Sewell, thank you so much. And if I can endorse and co-sign what you have said, I was invited to go on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem just this past January, and I can attest we were very, very safe. Sometimes plans shifted at the last moment. We felt very safe. I would have gone if economics were the only reason, or if going and just seeing firsthand were the only reasons, but I believe that people of the Holy Land were given charisms and vocations to help bring people into the stories of our faith, and they have been impoverished from not being able to live out those gifts, and that felt healing to be able to be present with them. And I think all of us can remember a time in our lives where we felt at rock bottom and lonely, and just the mere presence of a friend, that ministry of presence. I think we all know that to be true. So if you yourself can't make a pilgrimage, if that feels like it's outside of your realm, and you have the funds to fund somebody else to go, what a beautiful gift that would be.
Thank you, Bishop. Lovely things.
Thank you so much for coming. I'm curious as to what type of financial help assistance you are getting from the Episcopal diocese, the churches, both here in America and elsewhere.
Well, it's that campaign that we launched called Let Light Shine, which we launched Advent last year. And the majority of that money came from the US churches. We got sacrificial giving from Canada, some from the UK and Australia too. But our supporters here in the Episcopal Church were extraordinarily generous. Some from Holy Trinity Wall Street, or Trinity Wall Street, some from the Diocese of Wyoming, other people who've got historic links and connections with us. Some individuals, when I went this time last year, something like that, and did a sort of fundraising tour, I was absolutely humbled and amazed that some people were getting checks out and writing there and then, quite large numbers. I do feel we have been financially very well supported. And money is now not our primary need. People are our primary need. And that would make the world a difference. Our diocese has got huge needs. But again, the American, AFEDJ, the American Friends of the Episcopal Diocese of Jerusalem, it's so easy, it just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? Have given to our diocese $5 million this year. And that's incredible. And that means that we've been able to keep our Alchemy Hospital going, and St. Luke's Hospital going, and Princess Basma Centre going, and our other institutions, all of which have been impacted. So that, yeah, I am so grateful for that, and we are indebted to everyone who has helped contribute to that. There's a question.
Yes, thank you for coming also, of course. And fundamentally, I think your mission is, it's a journey of hope, fundamental, theological hope that you're bringing it. And it's so important that you've done this, I believe, to actualize, the presence, to speak from, one human being to another, and taking our focus in Christianity, as I've known it, is so much on a historical Holy Land, and many people fall back on that as being pristine, and they don't want to disrupt the perfection of that in a superficial sense of perfection. So I think it's wonderful that you're doing this trip, and very necessary to generate to instill lifeblood into the experience of that place. I've been there. I've been there 99, and stayed with you at St. George's. And I highly recommend it. If there's anybody in the room who hasn't been there, I'm not sure. But thank you for coming, and I think you're doing the right thing. A question, if you addressed it right now, was the committee for St. George's College, is that the same as the Episcopal Committee for St. George's?
The
North American Committee.
AFCDJ supports the whole diocese,
Okay.
and the North American Committee for St. George's College relates specifically to the college, and it's part of the international advisory. There are 3 international advisory boards which help me to have fingers out around the world. And the North American Committee is for here in Canada, and then the UK British Committee is for the UK, and then the Australia, New Zealand and Pacific Committee is for there. And some do more fundraising, some do more networking, and bring pilgrims and different things like that. They're not our management board, but they're like an advisory board.
Yes, thank you, Richard, for coming. I wanted to just take a moment to say, I keep hearing, what can we do? One of the things that you can do besides send money is talk to your congregations about your trip. If you have been to St. George's, if you have been on pilgrimage, I don't care if it was in 1965 or if it was in 2025, talk to your congregation, because oftentimes there are pilgrims in the pews who you don't know, that you can share your stories, share your connections, and you might find that there's 15 people in your congregation who have been to St. George's that have had life-changing experiences, and you didn't realize it. And so open up and talk to your congregations about your experience. My last trip was during COVID, and when Richard is saying that what they need are people, I can't tell you how true that is. Having gone over and experienced the Holy Land empty, and I mean completely empty, the thing that I heard repeatedly is thank you for coming. Thank you for just being a pilgrim and coming. Shower your money on everybody you can if you go, because they need it. But they miss seeing people. They miss seeing the travelers from all over the world. This is their vocation, to provide this experience for people, and they haven't had it. They haven't had it for this period, and they didn't have it for COVID. These are folks that are starving to feed us. So go. Go. Seriously, go. Go.
Really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Paul.
This is, we're sort of at time, so this will be our last question.
I just wondered how you at St. George's are treated by the Israeli government. Is there any pushback about your presence and your outspoken?
Well, our most recent visitor was Stephen Cottrell, the Archbishop of York, and we took him to some pretty tough and interesting places. We ended up in the South Hebron Hills, in a community that is being directly attacked by settlers and have 14 of their buildings in the village with demolition orders, which will be enacted any day now. And so we took Archbishop Stephen to go and talk to them and listen to them what's going on. We attracted the attention of some crazy settlers who blocked us in, and then they called the police. Police, in Israeli terms, are soldiers, heavily armed and very armored. It had a very profound impact. He'd never had an experience quite like it. And lots of other things, including being addressed by a group of women in Ramallah who gave one of the most coherent theological expositions of their experience of living under occupation that I ever heard. And it moved Archbishop Stephen to tears. And we talked long and hard about what message he would go back with to talk. And all the time I say to our visitors, please don't use language of concern. Use language of emergency. You know, when the building is on fire, you don't just say, well, this is a really very worrying situation. Something ought to be done. You get the fire brigade and you put the fire out. That's the situation we're in. So he heard that, and other people saying lots of other things to him. He's gone back and he made a very strong address yesterday in Lambeth Palace because he was hosting an event for NGOs and charities who directly work with in Israel-Palestine. And he dared to say that what he came to understand by talking to people throughout the land was that what Israel has been doing has been conducting genocidal acts. He didn't actually say it's a genocide, but he said specifically there are things which qualify as genocidal acts. And oh my goodness, haven't things exploded? Chief Rabbi is appalled and shouting all sorts of complaints. The Board of Deputies are very angry. And this is what happens. These are the reactions. And I am slightly worried that my next group of visitors who are coming next week, and when they say going to St. George's College, that they're going to say, we don't like that organisation, so I'm going to keep a slightly lower profile and pretend I'm up to only doing good things. So far we have had no direct attacks on us. I know the Israelis are watching me, but I've stopped being so cautious because if I have to restrain too much, I'd rather not be there because I couldn't live with myself. So I don't want to bring trouble to the diocese, and I don't want to bring trouble to St. George's, but there are certain things of conscience that you just have to do, and that's what I've been doing.
Dean Richard Sewell, thank you so much.